About the mysterious killer who calls himself the Zodiac, in the late 60s, they spoke not only in San Francisco and its environs, where, in fact, the crimes took place, but throughout America. The maniac was a master of suspense. He regularly sent encrypted messages to the press and the police, demanding attention to his person, front pages and all sorts of admiration. The exact period of the criminal activity of the Zodiac is unknown. Presumably, the first murder was committed in December 1968, and the last on October 11, 1969, after which only threats came from him. It is believed that the Zodiac carried out attacks on 7 people, 5 of whom were killed and 2 were injured. If you believe the maniac, then there were much more victims, as many as 37 people. First kills. Late on the evening of December 20, 1968, a couple of lovers from Vallejo, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, went to a Christmas party. On the way, they changed their plans and decided to stop at a secluded place near Lake German, where many young people came for solitude. At 2300, a driver passing by noticed a parked car, next to which lay 2 corpses. These were the bodies of Faraday and Jensen. Within 10 minutes, the sheriff arrived at the scene. It followed from the protocol that someone approached the car and shot at the young people who were in the back seat at that moment through the glass. The bullet hit the young man in the back of the head, and he died almost instantly. The girl managed to get out of the car and run about 12 meters, but the killer fired several bullets at her, after which she fell to the ground. Then the criminal finished off Betty almost point blank. The next murder happened only 6 months later, on July 5, 1969. Such breaks are usually not typical for serial killers. And this time, the victims of the attack were a couple, Darlene Ferrin and Michael McGow. Darlene was a married lady, but often went on a spree, as her husband was notified. Young people parked on the course of a golf club in Vallejo. In addition to them, there were 3 more cars of club visitors in the parking lot. After a while, a car drove up with its headlights off. McGow, who was somewhat tensed by an unknown person watching them from a dark car, asked the girl if she knew the driver. Darlene responded with something like, "Don't worry." Soon a man got out of the car and walked towards the couple. He took out a pistol and shot McGow in the neck. The second bullet hit him in the knee. An unidentified person walked around the car and fired 5 bullets at Darlene, after which he left, believing that the victims were dead. However, they were conscious. McGow let out a groan, and the criminal returned with 2 control shots. Nevertheless, the young people were still alive. Soon a company of golf club visitors approached the parking lot, and they called the police and doctors. The sheriff who arrived at the scene tried to ask the victims about the attack, but Darlene could no longer speak coherently, unlike McGow, who was operated on and survived. The girl died on the way to the hospital. On July 31, 1969, 3 messages arrived in the editorial office of 3 California newspapers, in which an unknown person called himself the same killer of young couples. He gave in the letters such details that, according to the police, only the criminal could really know. The notes were almost identical in content and began with the phrase, "This is the Zodiac speaking," but an unknown person attached a piece of cipher to each of them. All 3 ciphers, according to the maniac, were a single whole and contained information that could reveal his identity. Under the letters, he left a signature, a circle crossed out with a cross. Several versions have been put forward about the origin and meaning of the emblem, from the symbolic circle of constellations, divided into 4 sections, to the graphic image of a gun sight. The man who called himself the Zodiac demanded that his cryptograms be published on the front pages of every newspaper. The editors, who promptly notified the police, were advised to go along with the sender's demands. The authorities hoped that the messages would not end there and that sooner or later they would be able to expose the killer. The next Zodiac attack took place on September 27, 1969. And this time, a couple of young people suffered, Cecilia Ann Shepard and Brian Calvin Hartnell. They were relaxing on the beach 100 kilometers from San Francisco. The end of the month turned out to be warm, and the lake was quite crowded, but by the evening most of the vacationers had left. Cecilia and Brian stayed on the beach almost until dark when they suddenly saw a burly man in dark glasses approaching them. He hid for a moment behind a tree, and then came out already in a black hood with the sign of a crossed-out circle drawn on it. The unidentified man had a pistol in his hands, and a knife stuck out from his belt. The man approached the guys, pointing a weapon at them, and demanded to give him the car keys and money. He said he was going to go to Mexico. Hartnell complied with the requirement, but the offender did not stop there. He took out a rope and ordered Cecilia to tie Brian, and then he himself tied a knot in the girl's hands. He then announced that he was going to kill them. Hartnell asked the maniac to deal with him first, because he did not want to see the suffering of his girlfriend. The killer stabbed the guy 6 times, and then dealt with Cecilia, inflicting 10 wounds on her. Meanwhile, Brian Hartnell regained consciousness and managed to crawl on his stomach for about 200 meters and seek help. Cecilia was also alive at the time of the ambulance's arrival, but soon died in the hospital. The police, who examined the scene of the crime and the car of the young man, found an inscription made with a black marker on it. The killer gave the dates of the previous attacks and this one, as well as the place and time. The Zodiac also left its signature in the form of a crossed-out circle. It is believed that the last victim of the Zodiac was a young man who worked as a taxi driver. On the evening of October 11, 1969, Paul Stine picked up a passenger at an intersection in San Francisco, who asked to be taken to the intersection of Mall and Washington Streets in the northern part of the city. This entry was made by Stine in a special travel notebook, which taxi drivers were required to fill out. When the car arrived at the final destination, the passenger suddenly changed his mind about getting out and asked to drive a little further. The driver hailed a taxi a block away. Further, according to the testimony of witnesses, the passenger shot Stine in the head, after which he got out and opened the driver's door. Then some manipulations followed. As it turned out later, the killer cut off a piece of the taxi driver's bloodied shirt. He wiped the interior with it, inside and out. On November 8, 1969, the editor-in-chief of the Chronicle received a postcard containing another cryptogram from the Zodiac. It contained 340 characters and was never deciphered. And on December 20th, Belli received a Christmas message from the killer. Attached to the postcard was another bloody fragment of Stine's shirt. After that, the Zodiac disappeared for a long time. All further attacks, kidnappings and murders, which are somehow attributed to him, still remain unsolved, and therefore do not have sufficient grounds to be included in the list of the maniac. However, the Zodiac himself repeatedly came into contact with the newspapers, sending more and more messages, where he took responsibility for some unsolved crimes. He continued to play charades, promising to reveal his name, but many of his riddles were never deciphered. Among other things, the eccentric maniac expressed regret that people on the streets do not walk around with badges with his symbol. All of these messages came throughout most of 1970. After that, a letter was received from the Zodiac in March 1971, where he claimed responsibility for the murder of Donna Les, and then the maniac suddenly disappeared for 3 years, and again made itself felt only in January 1974. In a new message to the Chronicle, he cited his review of The Exorcist, calling it the best satirical comedy. Another review, Zodiac sent on May 8, 1974. This time he expressed dissatisfaction with the painting, Desolate Lands. The Chronicle received a few more messages not signed by the Zodiac, but copying his style, but there was no consensus about their authorship. Something else is important in this story. The mad killer did not want money, or even that ancient sense of a predator that intoxicates during the murder. All the Zodiac wanted was to combine Herostratus glory with the perfect murder. Taking advantage of the imperfection of the American legal system, each time he made the authorities and the police look like fools who are not able to catch one alone. But most importantly, he managed to immortalize himself in culture. There were a lot of assumptions about who actually could be hiding behind the pseudonym, Zodiac. The police received hundreds of letters in which Americans shared their suspicions about the identity of the perpetrator, up to blaming the next of kin. The wave did not subside for decades, and even in the 2000s, more and more new appeals were received. According to some versions, the perpetrator was not alone. Members of the Manson gang responsible for the death of Sharon Tate were also suspected of the murders. All the suspects involved in the case were acquitted and released for lack of evidence. The problem lies primarily in the fact that the criminal achieved his goal. Instead of the punishment of oblivion, he achieved eternal glory, which he could not get in any other way. In other words, the Zodiac is the old woman Shapokliak, brought to the extreme, who said that, "You cannot become famous for good deeds." So, it is important not who was this bloody killer, but who will raise his black banner next. And while society over and over again brings the Zodiac and the like to the top of the news, the successors of this terrible harvest will appear again. That's all, friends. Thank you for watching. See you again.